Spring's here, the sap's rising and it's time to go sailing. Here's a few thoughts about what we all need to do to make sure it goes smoothly. And I'm starting out under one of my favourite boats, the good old Contessa 32. Anybody who sails in Britain is going to have to paint the bottom every year. That's the big thing, and while she's out there are one or two other jobs to do. When it comes to maintenance, the business end of the boat, really, on this boat particularly, is the stern of the boat. There's a rudder and there's a propeller, and they are moving parts, so we need to have a look at them. I'm going to give the rudder a good old waggle and see if it moves. That's a good start. There is some movement there at the bottom. If I was going far this year, if I was going up to Norway or maybe going across the Atlantic, I think I'd want to have a look at that. I might take it off, take the rudder down and have a look, have somebody do it for me if I can't do it myself. If I was a bit strapped for cash, didn't want to do it, maybe I'd just leave it and monitor it. Watchful waiting, have a good look at it, even measure how much it's moving, and then look at it again when you bring the boat out. And especially if you have a mid-season scrub to keep her clean and sailing nicely, check it again then. And if the movement is galloping forwards, then do something about it, because you do not want to lose your rudder. Right, let's have a look at this propeller. It's a feathering propeller, and all its bits seem to be moving quite sensibly. Yeah, they seem very healthy. There's no play in them and everything's all right. Check the instructions, and if it needs servicing, then service it. Don't mess about. You've really got to do that. There's an anode on the propeller, which has been doing a good job, really. It's worn down. Again, there's a lot of meat left on it, so it's another of these jobs that really, technically, it should be done with a nice new shiny one, because the shiny one apparently works better than when they get dull. But if they're dull and you don't really want to change it because there's so much meat left on it, get a good wire brush, particularly one on a drill if you can. Get stuck into it and cheer it up. Get some bright metal back there and it'll probably go for another year. The last thing to look at here is the Cutlass bearing. That's the bearing where the shaft actually comes out through the hull. That's not the waterproof bearing, that's further inside. But the one at the aft end here tends to wear. And you shouldn't be able to move this propeller shaft much at all in that bearing. So I'm going to give it a good old swing now and see what happens. Ooh, yeah, there's quite a lot of play there. That really ought to be dealt with, I think. Again, you might feel this is a professional job. They're awkward things to get out, Cutlass bearings, I can tell you that. I've got the scars to prove it. So you might want to get the yard to do that. But if you've got that much movement, then I think you need to have it looked at. One last thing about the prop. What are you going to paint it with? Anti-foul it. What are you going to do? There's all sorts of theories about this. There's so much hocus pocus about this you can't imagine. I've just been walking around the yard and I just found a lovely prop and somebody had greased it. Well, that's an interesting idea. That's a lot talked about recently and maybe it makes sense. I've not tried it myself, but what I have tried is this. A few years ago, a manufacturer gave me a system for painting my propeller. You had to paint primer on it and then 2 coats of this and another coat of that and rub it down and make it all happy and tell it a joke. And at the end of all that, it was going to stay pristine clean all year. Well, you know what? I hauled out after 2 months for a scrub and it was covered in barnacles. So I never used that again. What I've done, again, all my life, and I found it works. You can only speak as you find, can't you? I get my ordinary anti-fouling, I get a nice brush and I put 1 coat of self-polishing anti-fouling on the propeller and that does it. It comes out, it'll be an awful lot cleaner than this one is at the end of the year. Cheap, cheerful, and it does the job. Most boats have anodes like this one on the hull itself, and beginning of the season is the time to have a good look at them and decide what you're going to do about it. Now this one has fought the good fight. It's clearly doing its job. If your anodes look like this, it means they're working. If you bring the boat out after a year and they're all shiny and new, they're not doing their job, because the whole purpose of them is to be electrolyzed, to be destroyed, because if they're being destroyed, whatever they're protecting is not being. So that's what you want to see. If you're feeling rich, and you really want to do the right thing, that's what I bought for my boat for this year. I've got 2 of these and they'll be going on. Beautiful, heavy, solid zinc, just what you need to keep things clear of electrolysis. It's a good idea before the boat goes into the water to make sure that the Seacocks are all working properly, that they're moving smoothly and that they function, because they can get stuck over the winter. They might even have been stuck when you came out and you didn't check them. So this is the time to do it. That's one of the big jobs when the boat's out of the water. Now, there's 2 basic sorts of Seacock that you're likely to come across. If you've got a new boat, the probability is that they're all operated by ball valves. Now, there's only so much you can do with a ball valve. If you can get some grease in a squirty can, and if you can get the ball valve moving, you get somebody inside to move it and squirt the grease up the hole, and it'll just work its way in and it'll help it on its way and help to keep it fresh. If you can't move it on the inside because it's seized, what you mustn't do is start hitting it with a hammer. Now, I've developed a technique for dealing with this, and it's very much a homespun solution, but it works. The problem you've got is that the handles are not really very long. They're only about hand length, and some of them are not even that. You get your hand on it, you try and move it, it's in an awkward position, you can't get at it and you can't heave it, and very likely the lovely plastic coat has gone and you've got a nasty bit of metal and it's cutting into your hand. Here's what you do. You find yourself an old box spanner in your shed. That's all you need. You pop that on to the handle, it gives you a bit extra and it gives you something lovely to hold, and you can give it a heave and that'll move it. The other sort of Seacock that you might find, especially if you have an older boat, is a Blake's Seacock. These are really the best, and they work with a bronze tapered cone that goes into a socket. The socket's on the boat and the tapered cone is on the end of the lever. And it's not unusual for them to seize as well. They've got little bolts, little nipper bolts that hold them all together on the inside. You take the bolts away, you slide it off the handle, and you think that'll move it now, and it doesn't. It won't move, and you're wrestling away. Usual problem, you can't get at it. You're tempted to hit it with a hammer. Don't. Here's what you do. You rootle in your toolbox and you find a meaty screwdriver, a proper job, something like this. It's got a nice hexagonal side. You take the bolts off the Seacock on the inside, you pop the screwdriver up, you give it a good old tap, and do you know, that Seacock will just jump in off its taper, and that's it, sorted. Once you've got it in your hand, you can clean it up, light coating of grease, pop it back in, bolt it down, nip the bolts up until it just moves, and that's it. Perfect, job done. Now, the boat we were just looking at had what we call an encapsulated keel. That means that the whole hull fared down into the keel and the ballast was put in from the inside, and it's a very strong way of making a boat. If the boat hits the bottom, there's every chance that it'll be all right unless it's really traumatic. This is a different kettle of fish altogether. This is a very modern hull type, and the keel is bolted on to the bottom of the hull, basically. If this keel hits the bottom hard, or if it sails very, very hard, there's a tremendous racking moment here. There's not a great deal of bearing surface, and the leverage on those bolts is something shocking. And if you've got that sort of keel, before you go back in the water, in fact, really, you should have done this in the winter, but right now is the last chance. Have a real critical look round where the keel joins the hull and make sure there are no cracks. There are on this boat. I'm just looking at it here. I can see there's been some movement. How drastic that movement is, for me as an amateur, it's difficult to tell. But I would want to have somebody who really knew about that, probably a surveyor, come and have a look at the inside here to see what was going on. Because there is certainly some movement been taking place, and there shouldn't be any. Not a tenth of a millimetre. Nothing. And clearly, that's not what's been happening here. So if you've got a keel which is bolted on, even if it's quite a long keel bolted on, check the joint and make sure that everything's okay. Some of the boats will have been in the water all winter, but whatever they've been doing, they've got to come out because they've got to have the bottom painted. So we'll just have a quick look at the bottom painting. This one's Contessa 32. I used to sail one of these. I sailed thousands of miles in one of these years ago, and I think they draw 5'6". So painting the bottom of this boat's going to be a piece of cake, because we just get our masking tape, we go round, that's the masking line. You can see where the anti-fouling ends. You can even feel it here. It sort of rolls round because of the weight of the paint. So we mask it all the way around the boat. Gets a bit tricky at the stern where it's going like that, but you'll find a way. Once it's masked, get yourself a roller. It costs a tenner, and you get a tray with it, and you tip your anti-fouling into the tray, get your roller working, and you roll it on. And you need a pole, you need a big broom handle to put on the end of it, because otherwise you're going like this and you get it all over you. You get that pole on there and you can rip into it and really do the job. And it doesn't take long before you've worked out how thick you're going to put it on. You'll soon work that out. Basically, you want to drag it out as far as you can, don't you? Because it costs a lot of money. And that's all you do. You can get under the keel nicely there to do that. And just all you've got to do is be there when they lift the boat on the slings, so you can just pick up the bits you've had to miss because of the chocks and the keel blocks. And that's it. Okay, boat's in the water. Let's think about the engine. Let's have a look at the batteries, because that's what's going to crank the engine over. What I suggest that you do, if you can manage this, if it's not too much trouble, just disconnect one from the other if they're not already disconnected, and put the tester across them and make sure they're all up to voltage. If one of them's dropped a lot of voltage, then it's got to go, because you can't have batteries that aren't keeping their voltage up. It's just no good. It'll probably drag the others down. In fact, really, if it's the domestic batteries and one's going down, it might be time to bite the bullet and get a new lot if you think about how long you've had them. So let's assume the batteries are all okay now. They're all hooked up. Terminals are good. A little bit of grease on, ready to go. Next thing, make sure you open the Seacocks. I wish I had £1 for every time I've started my engine at the beginning of the year and left the Seacock off and the exhaust makes that horrible open noise and you realise all is not well. Oh no, turn it on. Have I burnt my impeller? Turn them on now, because that way you can't forget. Okay, we've checked the oil and the water and all the other things, I'm sure. So now let's start them up. Now, here's the crunch. All sorts of things can happen with fuel systems over the winter. What you don't want is to start your engine and have a bubble that's been hanging around in the pipe somewhere just come through and hit the injector pump when you've left the marina, you're out in the river, there's a strong ebb running and there's a load of boats coming up and suddenly you've got no engine. Oh no, what a nightmare. It doesn't have to happen. All you do, you start your engine up now, you make sure that you've got your bow spring nice and tight and your stern line nice and tight. You have a good look behind you to make sure you're not going to wash some poor guy into the next berth, and then you pop it quietly into gear. It'll chunker away for a bit, the prop will go around, let it warm up, and then just put it up to, well, for a sailing boat with a smallish engine, put it on half revs and get it thoroughly warmed up to temperature. Motorboat, you'll have to be a bit discreet if you've got big props, but whatever you've got to do, run your engine in gear safely on the dock and run it for 10 minutes. If it's going to stop, it will. And if it doesn't, you've cracked it and you're ready to go. Now, sailing boats. Trying to hoist a Genoa, and particularly a mainsail, especially if the wind's behind you, it's a nightmare if there's breeze. Just wait for a quiet day. Get down there first thing in the morning perhaps, before the breeze kicks in. Make life easy for yourself, and that way you won't tear your sails, get them all rolled away nicely, and that's another job done. Check your rigging. Standing rigging, you can have a good look around the bottom, see how it all looks. You had a look in the autumn, so really nothing should have changed. But what you didn't do in the autumn, if you didn't bring your mast down, was go up and have a look. And somebody has got to go up there in the spring. You can't just go sailing having done nothing all winter. You really must go up and have a look, see what's going on. And while you're up there, you can check a few things. You can make sure that the shrouds are located properly in the ends of the spreaders. You can have a look at what terminals there are as best you can and see if all is well. Have a look at the clevis pins, see if they look healthy. Make sure the split pins are all in place and see if the sheaves in the masthead are turning nicely. Sometimes they seize up. Take the pressure off the halyards and just turn them with your hand. You'll probably have to reach up to them, just turn them. You won't be able to do it with the halyard you've gone up on, but you can at least do it on the other, and if that one's all right, they probably both will. If it's not, you've got to clear it somehow. Maybe a spray of WD-40, depending on what it's made of. Maybe even just water will clear it. Somebody send you up some on the Burgee halyard and clean it out as best you can, but get them moving, because there's nothing worse than trying to pull a halyard over a dead sheave. So make sure everything's working. And now the next job while you're up there is to have somebody turn on the masthead lights, that tricolour, and maybe your anchor light if you've got one up there. Turn them on, let's see if they're working. And with God's blessing, they'll come on. And if they don't, oh dear me, you've got to have a look, and it's probably the bulb. So you've got to get in there, and while you're up there, change the bulb. So once again, it's useful if you've got a little halyard, maybe for a Burgee or a spinnaker halyard or something, that somebody on deck can pull stuff up to you, and then you can do your job and then send it back down again. Otherwise, you've got to bring a bucket with everything you can think of and the kitchen sink, and you'll forget something. So have somebody down there looking after you. And then down you come, check the steaming light as you go past, and if that's all working, you're in pretty good trim. So when you get back to the deck, take a walk round. Turn on the nav lights, make sure the bow lights and the stern light are working. If they're not, you know what to do. Have a look at your running rigging, make sure that's in good shape. You see some horrible things as you look around marinas, the way people have left it. It's all going green and horrible. It shouldn't be, because you should have sent it below and just put some sleepers in for the winter. And if you've done that, you're all right. If you haven't, you'll have green rigging, and you'll have to try and put it in the washing machine when the other half's not looking, because I'm not allowed to do that. I get into terrible trouble if I do that, but my shipmate does, and he's laughing. So make sure you look after your ropes, but if you haven't, bung them in the washing machine. If you've got varnish on deck, now's the time to do it. You don't want to be doing it halfway through the season. Have a look round. It's bound to want something. Even if it doesn't, give it a good rub down when you get a nice day, early in the morning, go round, knock the dew off as there is any, give it an hour to dry, and then give it a wipe with terps to get it absolutely dry, then a rub down with whatever grade you've decided to use. Get the varnish on, and don't put anything on after 3 o'clock in the afternoon early in the year, because if you do, the dew will come down on it and it'll go milky and white, and your life will be a misery. You've got to scrape it off again, and you'll probably scrape half the rest off. Just don't do it. Don't be greedy. Go coat by coat, day by day. And if your varnish is in good condition, 1 or 2 coats will do it, and the boat will shine and smile at you all season. There's nothing worse than crummy varnish looking awful. And quite frankly, scrub teak's a cop-out as well. I like to see it varnished, but maybe you just go for the easy option. There you go. But now's the time to sort it out. Now, down below, not a lot to do down here, really. You'll be putting your furniture and your books up and everything, but what you must do is replace your fresh water filter. I don't know how you do this on your boat, but what I do, my pressure water drives the face washing and the hand washing and the showers and all that stuff and the washing up, but I have a foot pump that drives what I drink, and that comes through its own pipe from the tank, and that pipe goes through a charcoal filter, an inline charcoal filter, 25 quid from your friendly chandler. And if you haven't got a friendly chandler, go to the caravan shop, they're all the same. Bung that in there and you'll have lovely tea all summer long. And just replace it every year. For what it costs, it's well worth it. Servicing life jackets should take place once a year, and ideally, in a perfect world, you're going to bring them into a place like this and get the professionals to just do it. You may have reasons for not doing that, maybe it's too far or one thing or another. So if that's the case, it is possible to service your own life jackets. First thing is, you open them up and you blow them up manually. And if they stay up nice and hard for 24 hours, well, that's probably as long as you're going to last if you're drifting around in the sea. So that'll do you right. Make sure they hold their air. Next thing is, how are they going to blow up? Well, there's a cylinder containing CO2 that blows them up. Take that off, it just unscrews, easy enough. You'll find it's got a tiny little stamped letters on it, and one of them is TARE. TARE, T-A-R-E, and there'll be a weight. That is the weight of the bottle. Any weight over and above that is the weight of the gas and the net weight. And there'll be another one that says this is the net weight. So you put your bottle on your kitchen scales, your lovely accurate kitchen scales, and you weigh it, and you make sure it's got enough gas in. And there's one other thing. that you can now do with a modern life jacket. If you've got the sort of life jacket that goes off automatically when you hit the water, there's a cartridge in there that needs to be replaced every so often. Check with the instructions to see how often. You can buy these things on the internet now. They're surprisingly inexpensive and they're easy enough to install. So that's the final thing. Good, that's life jackets. Now, life raft, you can't really do that yourself. Look at the paperwork and see if it's up to date, and it's going to be in date for the rest of the season. If it's not, some people would take a chance on that, but if you're going to France, for example, from the south coast of England, the French might take a look at it, and if it's out of date, you'll get a hefty fine. So don't even think about it, get it done. Same goes for your flares. The French hate out-of-date flares. So if your flares are getting near to the end of their life, get yourself some new ones. Come and see somebody like these people, or talk with an expert, see what you should have for what you're going to do. You may not need a full ocean pack, might be enough to have a coastal pack, which will save you quite a lot. But just make sure you've done it and that your flares are in date. What about paperwork? We're an independent nation now, so we can't rely on everything just going smoothly for us if we go to Europe. You're going to need extra paperwork that we never used to need before. Make sure it's in date. Make sure your passport is in date. It's got to be at least 6 months left on it before you go into a country now. Otherwise they might not let you in. Make sure that your ship's registry is up to date. It only lasts 5 years. I got caught out with that a few years ago. I went gaily off to France, the gendarmes came on board, asked to see my paperwork, and it was out of date. Oh no! It's easy enough to get it renewed. Just do it. Make sure that you've got a certificate of competence of some sort. A international certificate of competence is probably going to be all right if you're going to Europe, but they only last, I think it's 5 years. Have a look at the date on yours, make sure it's in date, and if not, get it updated. Carry your insurance documents to show the people who want to know, and make sure you've got something that proves that you've paid your VAT, and you really should have the original with you rather than some copy. Don't ask me why, these people are beyond me, but that's the way you have to do it. Make sure your paperwork's in order and have it on board. So that's it. We're all done and ready for the season. Climb aboard and off we go. There's a whole world out there just waiting for us.